It doesn't mean that they got rid of healthcare. Healthcare, education was all maintained free. But these were the things they did to survive. And it did help them survive. Tourism became and is still the #1 source of income in the country. The nickel mines, Cuba is second or third producer of nickel in the world. They have one of the largest resources of nickel in the world. It's a very strategic metal. And the mines seized up in the time of the special period, the early part. And so mainly Canadian corporations, the Sherritt Corporation came in and started up all the nickel mines. They're all operating at full operation. Nickel is now become the #2 source of income in Cuba. And it used to draw very high prices, and I'll talk about that later. So basically, Cuba not only survived the 1990s and U.S. intensification of aggression against Cuba. By the way, who's ever heard of the Helms-Burton Law? The Helms-Burton Law was Clinton's baby. That was 1996. He signed the law in March, which is very, very severe against Cuba. It says that any corporation in the world that trades with Cuba or with any Cuban entity that used to be U.S. owned those executives of that company shall be prohibited from entering the United States, and they can be sued at any time in the future by any U.S. citizen. That is another big internationalization of the blockade. And it's a violation of international law, it's a violation of many other countries' laws, but it has a very severe effect on Cuba. Interestingly, Sherritt, which is, I think, the biggest investor in Cuba, this Canadian firm that does nickel mining, they got a letter, all their executives got a letter from the U.S. Treasury Department saying, you and your families are no longer allowed to enter the U.S. And so immediately the Sherritt board voted to have their next meeting in Havana, which is, I think, a pretty nice response. But anyway, so since then, the productive capacity in Cuba, because of the lack of resources, dropped very drastically by 34%. That's like major, major depression of a scale we've never experienced, not even during the Great Depression in the U.S. And yet there was some layoffs. For the first time in the revolution, there were layoffs. But everybody who was laid off at the time in the 90s was kept 60% of their income until they were placed into a new job. Most jobs were still state-owned, still state-run, but they also allowed self-employment. They had a rule that you could not employ somebody else and exploit somebody, but you could become like a plumber, go fix people's houses. You could rent a room or your apartment out. You could become a taxi driver, but you had to license for it. You had to get a license, and you had to pay taxes for it. Why taxes? Cubans don't pay taxes for anything of any sort. But if you're self-employed, you pay taxes because the government still has to provide free health care, all the social services people are accustomed to. So you can't just make your own money and then not contribute to society. And they also said, we're not doing this so people become capitalists. We're doing this so you can become employed because the state cannot provide employment for everyone. So those are the basic things. So from until 1996, it was basically survival mode. And then, because of tourism, the nickel mining, Cuba started to have an increase in their economy. And for the first time in 1996, after 6 years of very hard sacrifice. For example, caloric intake of Cubans went from 2,500 a day calories to 1,500. And everybody lost weight. It was just survival. So in 1996, things started to improve. Actually, in 2000, 2001, 2002, the economy grew at a very strong rate, even 10, 11%. Things were looking up. But they've never reached the level of pre-Soviet collapse, not yet. So what has happened since 2008? What's happened in the world since September 2008? Pardon? The economic crisis, the financial economic crisis, which is also basically a capitalist crisis. It's affected Cuba and every other oppressed country. But to give you an idea of how severe it is for Cuba, nickel ore was drawing a price of $50,000 a ton as of September 2008. And within a few months, it dropped to between 9 and 10,000. Now, 50% of Cuba's foreign income, 50% for the whole country, comes from nickel. So if the price of nickel drops by 80%, or what, 75%, 80%, what do you think it does for their purchasing ability for food, everything that they supply to the population? It's a very drastic crisis. But we don't read about that in the news. All we read is 500,000 workers were laid off, or are going to be laid off. But a country like Cuba, which gets no credit in the world, they get no loans from any banks. The U.S. sees to that. In fact, right now, European banks are being fined by the United States for accepting Cuban money in their banks or in the transactions. The price of food as of 2008, and even before that, the year before, with biofuels and the corn skyrocketing, even in Mexico and so on, the biofuels has created an increase in food price. For Cuba, for example, I think that the price of milk to import increased 3 times, and they guarantee for every child up to the age of 7 a liter of milk every day for like pennies. But everything they've had to import, rice and all the essential foods, they import 60% of the food has gone up 2, 3, 4 times. And this is with a limited income. Tourism has been affected worldwide. Their tourism, I think, increased by, I think they said something like 3% over the last year. But the amount that the tourists are spending has gone down by 13%. So in every economic sector, they're being hit very hard. So they also have this problem, which is a problem kind of unique to them as a socialist country, and that is through all the difficulties, Cuba has never cut down on their healthcare services or schooling. In all the time of the special period, they kept creating more classrooms. They never shut down a classroom. They never had to pay for university